listening to the Astral Hour. I'm your host, Astral Meadow. Join me as we take a glimpse into the mysterious. Welcome, everyone. Today I'm joined by a returning guest and dear friend, Ashley Sedorovich. Ashley is a dedicated homeopath and holistic wellness practitioner with a deep passion for natural healing. In this episode, we're diving into the fascinating world of cell salts, a profound yet often overlooked aspect of homeopathy. Cell salts are mineral compounds that play a crucial role in our body's health and vitality, acting as essential building blocks for cellular function. Ashley and I will explore how these 12 remedies can support physical, emotional, and energetic well-being, how to incorporate them into daily life, and why they're such a powerful yet accessible tool for self-care and healing. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming back on. We love having you on the podcast.
Oh, well, I love being here. It's always a good time getting to spend time with you and talk about things that we love. So I'm really excited about this podcast too. I know we've been planning this for a little while, so I'm super excited. We're finally getting to chat some more about it.
Yeah, yeah. So, for those who don't know much about cell salts, could you give a little background on what they are and the person who discovered them?
Yeah, absolutely. So, cell salts actually go by a couple names. So, you may have heard of them referred to as tissue salts or as biochemic salts. Essentially, what they are, they're a group of 12 mineral compounds that support the balance and health of the body's cells. So, they're based on a concept essentially that the minerals, the 12 minerals, are vital for the proper functioning of the body and that deficiencies in these minerals can lead to health issues. The cell salts and the application of the cell salts originated with Dr. William Heinrich Schuschler, and I am not German, so hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. But he developed a system of medicine that he called biochemistry. And so this biochemistry, it's not what we consider biochemistry to be in the modern day. Modern day biochemistry really focuses more on molecular biology and cellular chemistry, whereas the biochemistry that Dr. Schuschler developed was more aligned with holistic healing practices. And he essentially believed that by supplementing with these 12 salts when you were in a deficiency with one of them, that would then help improve your overall well-being. And so he based this on observations that he had made throughout his own time practicing as a physician. Dr. Schuschler, a lot of people ask too, was he a homeopath? Because the cell salts are often used frequently with homeopathy, but he actually was not a homeopath. He was influenced by homeopathy, but in the traditional or classical sense of homeopathy, he wasn't. He was just very heavily inspired by it and even used the cell salts in potency. But the cell salts were used more in lower potencies. So typically you would see the cell salts used in a 6x potency. You may see a 3, a 9, or a 12, but most commonly they're used in a 6x, which means that they are somewhat diluted, but they're not as diluted as homeopathic remedies are, and they are not diluted past the point of Avogadro's number. And that Avogadro's number is really kind of a critical distinction to be aware of, because at that point, when a substance is diluted past that number, it no longer contains any of the material substance in it. It only contains basically the essence or the energetic imprint of it at that point. but the cell salts actually are not diluted past that. So there is still a little bit of the material substance in them. And they actually act a little bit more so on the physical plane, which is really in alignment with that deficiency perspective, as opposed to homeopathic remedies, which act more on the energetic plane, especially as you go up higher in dilution into higher potencies of them. So he he didn't practice on the principle of like cures like, but he was heavily influenced by homeopathy. He just worked more from a like a supplementation standpoint, if you will.
That was a beautiful synopsis of that complex question.
Well,
Uh,
thank you.
so one thing that really stood out to me when I was rereading this book was that the cell salts are able to bypass the digestive system, which allows them to go straight to the cell. And I thought this was very interesting for people that have a hard time with the side effects of certain supplements because they might cause something like constipation or, it's just like too much on their system. So I thought that it was a really cool little note that the more diluted, the easier it actually is on the body to absorb it. Um, so that was just something that really stood out to me that I appreciated.
Yeah, that's super cool. And if you think about that, things that are not diluted. So like if you take that iron in the material form, that works on a very, very physical plane and can cause very, very physical symptoms,
Right.
that go along with it. And then as you like you had mentioned, as you start diluting that more, the higher the dilution, or the more times it's diluted, the further you get away from that physical plane. So you kind of stop, seeing those side effects, if you will, of taking something in the material dose, which, was, really kind of Hahnemann's wheelhouse. But Dr. Schuschler also really started picking up on that with with his work with the cell salts as well. And you're absolutely right. It's super cool to see that play out in real life.
Yeah. So could you briefly explain the overall difference between cell salts and traditional homeopathic remedies for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and this topic was something that I had a lot of fun doing a deep dive into, because when I first learned about cell salts, I learned about them in conjunction with homeopathy, but they were presented to me as, they're not homeopathy, but I never really got a good explanation as to what they are. So this, looking into this really kind of helped me understand the differences. And so I think the most important thing to recognize is that homeopathy works on a set of established principles. The primary being that like cures like, and cell salts can be used according to the like cures like principle of homeopathy, but they don't have to be used according to that principle. And so it's kind of like the square and the rectangle argument, right? And I think if you think about it that way, it helps kind of understand that difference, right? So cell salts can be used homeopathically, but they aren't necessarily homeopathy in and of themselves. And so then when you start looking, kind of going through, well, how do they differ then? Um, if you look at their composition, so cell salts are made from 12 minerals that are naturally found in the body, whereas homeopathic remedies can be made from plants or minerals or animal substances, and they work on a more energetic plane, whereas like we had talked about before, the cell salts work more on the physical ailments. There's also a difference in the potencies. So if you look at cell salts, you're not going to find a cell salt that is any higher of a potency than a 12x, because at that point you're starting to get into more of a homeopathic dilution rate, and it's going to be working on a more energetic plane and way less physical. Um, and the homeopathic remedies can go from lower potencies all the way up to very, very high potencies, depending upon what you're trying to target with your specific application of the homeopathic remedies. The cell salts work mostly, they're most commonly used on addressing those mineral imbalances, and they're typically prescribed based off of that. They're most commonly prescribed based off of that. But the homeopaths that use them tend to apply them more from a homeopathic lens based off of the like cures like and looking at totality of symptoms and single cell salt use. And then lastly, I think the other big thing to recognize is that when you're using cell salts are safe for daily use and daily supplementation. And so you can take them. You don't have to worry about causing any type of proving from them. You can take them for a longer term to support overall health. You can also use them acutely as well. Whereas homeopathic remedies, you typically use them for a very specific purpose, and you use them until that purpose or that ailment or that disease state has been removed from the system, and then you stop taking the homeopathic remedy. Whereas the cell salts can be more of a continued use. So I think essentially, if you think about it in terms of the square and the rectangle conversation, then that really helps, understand where the differences are and why they seem so closely related, because they're almost essentially born of the same cloth,
Right.
but how you apply them is a little bit different.
Right. Right. Awesome. Okay, so now let's get into breaking them down individually. So this is going to be a very quick summary of them, but Ashley and I are going to be creating a YouTube channel called Is That Homeopathy? And we will focus more on these individually and do maybe a more extensive deep dive when we're not in such a time crunch. So I'll let you start with number one, and then I'll take
Yeah.
over with number two.
All right, awesome. So, cell salt number one is called calcium fluoride, also known as calc fluor. And so this cell salt is primarily involved with strengthening of bone. So it has an affinity for the bones in the teeth, as well as the elasticity of tissues. And if you think about it, calcium fluoride is, essentially what the primary component of bones is. So it can help support maintaining bone density. It can help support the flexibility of the skin, blood vessels, ligaments. It's great for issues with varicose veins or for hemorrhoids, joint pain, even loose teeth. And when you are looking at how you can apply this into your life, a couple different things that I've used it for, I've seen it used for, would be for strengthening of bones and teeth or remineralization of teeth, or even after a broken bone or a fracture to the bone. It can help kind of rebuild that tissue back together. And this one in particular is really good when it's used along with calc, floss, and silica. There's actually a combination of the three of them that can be used for strengthening the enamel on teeth. And then the last thing that I really want to highlight about this one is that it's great when paired with homeopathic remedies for things like back or joint pain. that are similar to that rust tox profile of the pain is worse at the beginning and then it gets better with continued movement. So you can pair this with remedies like rust tox to help alleviate some of those joint pains that you may be experiencing that get better as you're continuing to move.
Awesome. Yeah, I love that you highlighted the fact that they can be used together and that they're very complementary. And, there's sometimes fear around things antidoting something else, or people just aren't really educated on it. So it's good to go ahead and drop that in that even if you are on a constitutional remedy, you can still use the cell salts very safely alongside them. So I'll jump in with number two, which is calc phos, also known as calcium phosphate or phosphate of lime. It has an affinity for the bones, the muscles, and the teeth. So some overlap with the calc floor here. It's a regulator of healthy cellular activity. So it's a really great one when you're just generally feeling kind of run down and exhausted, and you need a little pick me up. Sometimes this will be a perfect one for that. It's really good for people that catch colds very easily. And it's also great for children who have a slow development, like delayed dentition, or they're just not quite hitting those growth spurts at the same pace as their peers. This might be one that you would want to look into for that. Also, for ailments that are the result of malnutrition. It can intensify the action of other cell salts. So sometimes if you have a cell salt that's very well chosen, but it's just not quite hitting right, sometimes combining it with the calc phos can actually intensify the action there. It's really good. It's like a good tonic after a lot of mental strain or exhaustion, or the convalescent stage, after a cold where you're just not quite bouncing back. You can take this, and sometimes it will help you restore that vital energy. It can also help with digestion and the assimilation of, the supplements or the foods that you're eating. And it's also really good. It can be useful for many disorders of the reproductive organs, especially in women. Um, I thought it was interesting when I was reading that it can support the after effects from the birth control pill. So women that get off the pill have irregular periods, they're not quite able to find that balance in their cycle again. This can be really supportive for those people, and it's also good for acne that comes about during puberty. So all the phosphate cell salts are recommended for nerve ailments, but calc phos has some specific successes with certain types of neuralgia. Um, these are characterized by aching bones, anemia, rheumatism, and so on. So when you combine it with some of the other phosphate cell salts, um, it becomes this really powerful tonic. And it's also can be used for spasms and cramps. So if you've tried MagFos, which is kind of our first go-to, if you've tried that and it's just not quite cutting it, maybe look into CalcFos because it might be a better match.
All right. So moving on to the third one, then that it's called calcium sulfate, also known as calc sulf. And so this salt is important for skin health, detoxification, and wound healing. And it's involved in the cellular repair and removal of waste products from the body. And if you think about it, with its affinity for skin health as well as removing waste products, so the skin is one of our primary detox pathways and how our body expels waste. And so we learn a lot about that. We've learned a lot about this in our homeopathy classes, where homeopaths secretly love seeing things like rashes come up through the course of treatment because it means the body is pushing out whatever is in it that's causing it to be in a less than optimal state. And so this calc sulf can really help the body, process through moving those things out of the skin. So, one thing to keep in mind with this is that the color of the discharge is very important. And with calc sulf, the discharge tends to be yellow and blood streaked. And so, you would see this commonly used with things like acne or boils or any wounds that or abscesses that may be discharging but not necessarily healing that are pushing out a yellow, lumpy, thick, like or blood streaked pus. And if you think about the profile of Hepar sulf, um, this would be um, something that you could potentially look at as opposed to jumping to the homeopathic remedy of Hepar sulf because they have a very similar um, case, a very similar use case, if you will. Um, but if it doesn't respond with HEPAR, then you can always look at calc sulf, or you can potentially even use calc sulf and a cell salt before even jumping to that. So, um, in addition to any skin ailments, you can also consider this for coughs, colds, or ear infections or eye infections, where those discharges are that thick and yellow, lumpy discharge. And so, if you have nasal mucus that's dripping down the back of the throat, or when you get that annoying like um, uh, when your nose gets blocked up and it's really annoying on that one side and it's not on the other side, that is calc sulf is really good for that. And it's also really good for a creepy cough that's only there generally in the morning on waking. um, so this would be a really, really good remedy. And I've heard this one used a few times this cold season to kind of knock out that lingering ick that's been
Mhm.
hanging around after the majority of the illness has moved on.
Yep, I can validate that one firsthand. So, all right. So number 4 is ferrum phos, also known as ferrum phosphate or phosphate of iron. It has an affinity for the blood vessels, and the nerves. So the ferrum phos is responsible for the transportation of oxygen through the bloodstream and strengthens the walls of the vessels, especially the arteries. Because oxygen rich blood is essential to vital health, ferrum phos is critical in ailments characterized by congestion, inflammation, fever, and rapid pulse. So, this is definitely one that you want to consider as that first aid trauma response cell salt. It can kind of be used similarly to aconite or arnica at that first response of a trauma. So it can be great with fevers that have no individualizing symptoms that just kind of come out of nowhere, characterized by red spots on the cheeks or paleness. It's also, there was a lot of mental rubrics with this one of depression, tiredness, and dizziness. Also, headaches that are triggered from a rush of blood to the head. So, and the dizziness comes alongside that. So the story in the book that it was talking about was the woman in her garden leaning over and she got up too fast and she got very dizzy and disoriented as a result of that rush of blood to the head. And so it's important to think about that as it is helping move that oxygen through the blood. And so that's kind of where the trigger is coming from. It can also be really helpful in cases of anemia, where people are having to supplement things like iron. They might also want to include this into their regimen. It can be really helpful during the menstrual cycle for women that tend to get a little bit on the anemic side during that time. Um, it can also be helpful after a vomiting attack, specifically thinking about, in pregnancy when there's certain stages where you're just vomiting very often. It can be very helpful there. And also, when there's a frequent desire to urinate due to bladder inflammation. So, that in stage of pregnancy and sometimes postpartum, there can a lot of times be that flare up and some struggle here. So if you're having that incontinence due to the bladder inflammation, this is something to consider. It can also be helpful for the loss of your voice or hoarseness due to the irritation of the throat. So if you have that sort of beginning stage of maybe some laryngitis, you might want to look into this. So the big thing here that stands out for this one and how I've used it most often is that first stage of fever or an acute, where you're just kind of starting to feel off. It hasn't really set in. So the first stage of inflammation is going to be the red flag that, okay, let's go ahead and take the ferrum phos. And I have used it on countless occasions with myself and the people that I work with. And, I would say like 5 times out of 10, it'll go ahead and knock it out. Like if you can really be tuned into your body and catch it right at that first stage, a lot of times it will help you bounce back without you actually getting, that deeper second stage of the inflammation setting in. And you also want to think of ferrum phos for nosebleeds. So either after an injury or when blowing your nose during a cough or cold, if you have that blood streak snot, that might be a good sign that ferrum phos would be a great support for you.
Love Ferrum Floss. It's one of the top three I carry around with me everywhere.
Yes, you definitely are one of the ones that helped me realize that it needed to be kept in my purse at all times.
What's that one meme where I think it was on one of the talk shows when they're like, and you get a car, and you get a car, and you
Mm-hmm,
get a
mm-hmm.
car, and I'm like that with Ferrum Foss, and you get some Ferrum Foss, and
Yes.
you get some Ferrum Foss. It's
Oh,
just it's just so broadly applicable to so many situations. That is like one you definitely need in that first aid kit for sure.
yes.
Okay, so moving on to number five, then it is potassium chloride, or also known as calimere, and this cell salt helps maintain the health of mucous membranes and is crucial for detoxification. It supports the body's ability to clear congestion and balance fluids in the tissues. So, again, thinking about that late stage illness where you're trying to clear out all of the mucus and the congestion, this may be a really good one to have in your back pocket for that. Um, and with this, we talked about the color with the calc sulf being yellow and blood streaked. So the color discharge that you would be looking for with calimera is white. And you can think of this in instances where you have that like lingering cough or those stuffy head colds or sinus infections with that white discharge coming out. If you open up your mouth and take a look at your tongue and you notice that it's coated white, or maybe there's some white ulcers or some thrush in there, this may be a good option for you to look at. And then also with earaches where the eustachian tubes are a bit congested, and so hearing is affected, or maybe you hear that snap, crackle, and pop noise in the ear after the cold, this would be a good one to consider as well.
Awesome. I feel like we're doing great on time. I was nervous about that, so we're hitting it. All right, number 6 is caliphosphate, also known as potassium phosphate. It has an affinity for the nerves, also the muscles, skin, and brain. So it is it's known as like a nerve tonic or the soother of jangled nerves. And this is one that I keep in my purse at all times. As someone that is a very anxious individual, it is really great for when we're feeling depleted and exhausted after a period of overwork or strain. So think like exams, or, we're preparing to teach a 6-hour class, and you've crammed a lot of information in, and now you go to teach it, but, you have a trouble focusing. So this is going to be a really great support to help give us that mental focus and clarity and to help us remember information. So there was a lot of mental rubrics with Kelly Foss. It can be a really great support, not only for anxiety, but also depression, grief, sorrow, and despair that goes on for long periods of time. So it can be a really great support on that emotional level. It's also really good for headaches. That's etiology is nervous tension. So each well, we talked about this earlier that 10 of the 12 cell salts are known to have headache rubrics. So it's really important to pay attention to the little differences between them if you really want to narrow down which one might be the best for something like a headache. So this is going to be the headache that comes on after nervous tension. So you've studied, you've pushed yourself, you're just exhausted, and now you have a headache. This might be the one to think about, maybe even over Mag Phos, which is a lot of times the one people naturally go to. So it can also be good for irrational fears. So I think about maybe the aspen, like the fears that we don't really know where they come from. They're just kind of coming out of nowhere. And one of the rubrics was when you wake up at night and you see like a shadow in the dark and you're scared that it might be, um, some mysterious figure and that freaks you out. That's the kind of irrational fears that may point to the fact that this might be a supportive remedy for you. It can be really good when you're just overall emotionally sluggish. Um, and it can also be great if you're having some insomnia that is brought about after a period of excitement or intense work, or maybe even um, a lot of like emotional grief, just straining yourself too much mentally. So when you're so worn out, you've pushed yourself that you cannot sleep. And I have definitely had the experience of this when I have over prepared for something and then laid in my bed at night very anxious. And I can attest that this remedy actually does work for that because the past few times I have taught, I've taken this remedy while studying and I was actually able to sleep through the night, show up to class on time, and have a very clear, focused mind. So I can attest that this remedy is absolutely um, wonderful for that. So,
Yeah, Kelly Foss is it. That's also in my top three, and it's absolutely fantastic for um, any type of issue related to being anxious or nervous or worn down from just the mental load of
mhm.
things. I definitely recommend considering to add this to your take with you everywhere you go kit.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so next up is potassium sulfate, also known as Kali sulf. And this cell salt is important for skin health. It helps with oxygenation and elimination processes, and it assists in the body's ability to clear waste and toxins. So it improves the health of the skin and the mucous membranes. And it's commonly used for skin conditions like eczema, psoriasis, or dermatitis, but it can also support respiratory health and aid in sinus infections or other cold symptoms. So going back to color, so this one is more for yellow discharges. And so you would distinguish this one from calc sulf, which was the other yellow one, by the blood streaked tinges in there. So this would be yellow without the streaking, and the calc sulf would be more of that yellow with some blood or like rusty color in there as well. And you can think about this in situations that maybe resemble a pulsatilla case. And so, in those instances where the person maybe is generally worse for heat and better for fresh air, or they have the thick yellow discharge with a cough or a cold or an earache, or maybe the tongue is coated yellow, um, this would be a cell salt that you would want to look at. If they have a cough where the cough is loose, but the mucus isn't really expectorating, this would be something to look at. And then also when there's crackling in the ears when you're chewing, or there's a hearing loss, a temporary hearing loss from mucus buildup in the middle ear. Another keynote to go along with this one that you would want to look at is if symptoms were brought on by a change in weather from cold to warm, um, or that the moving pains. So, like with pulsatilla, where we have that joint pain that kind of hops around the body, or pains that hop around the body. Um, Cali Sulf is one if that's going on in your body, or if you're working with somebody and they're expressing their sensations that way as they're kind of moving around. Cali Sulf may be a cell salt that you might want to look at for that as well.
Awesome. All right, so number 8 is magphosph, also known as magnesium phosphate. It has an affinity for the muscles, the nerves, and the bones. So this one is known as the homeopathic aspirin. So you'll have a lot of people send you this way when you're just feeling like you need to reach for that Tylenol or the ibuprofen. This is when this one might come to mind. So it can be helpful in situations like you have an earache, a toothache, a headache, teething pain. The pains may also be neuralgic, which would be sharp pains that come and go. The modalities with this one would be better from pressure or heat. So if you are, I actually used this last night. My hips were really hurting and I had the thought, oh, I need to have a heating pad. And then I was like, oh yeah, the Mag Foss. But so when you feel like that hot bath is going to be the best support, this one might be one to consider in that situation. So it's an antispasmodic. It's really great for cramps. And if you think about, with menstrual cramps, it's such a stereotypical picture of Magfoss because you tend to want to put pressure on the area. You're kind of leaned over and you want to have that heating pad with you. So that is like the picture perfect case of when Magfoss would be a perfect match. So it does act on the nervous system because it is has the FOSS in it. So I somehow got all the FOSS remedies as I was doing this. So there was a lot of rheumatic support and nerve support with all the FOSS remedies. So it can help with pains in the bowels, cramps in the stomach, pains in the spinal cord, convulsions, cramps from prolonged exertion, stiffness, numbness, or awkwardness. It can also help ease nervous asthma, heart palpitations, and various kinds of shooting pain. The pain tends to move from place to place and is reoccurring. It may show up in the bowels, the head, the stomach, the ovaries, or the limbs. So it can be like shooting arthritic pain, and can also help with the support rheumatism. Also, spasmodic labor pains and leg cramps. A note here is that this particular remedy works better when added into hot water. So Ashley helped coin the phrase mug foss for me, which helped me remember because I'd taken it a few times and I was like, why is it not working? It's like the perfect match, but I was not putting it in hot water. And once I started to work with it that way, I was noticing, almost a more immediate, like 10 minutes later, I was starting to get relief. So keep that in mind that this particular one works better in hot water. And in the book I was reading, it also said that it can be applied directly. So I haven't tried this yet, but you take that warm water, maybe soak a rag in it, and then apply it directly to the area is a way that you can work with this one. Um, it can also be paired with the Cali Foss. So the Cali Foss operates on the gray nerve fibers and the Mag Foss on the white ones. Both of these are closely connected, and a disturbance to one will affect the other. So these are at times best taken together. So definitely consider that. Unlike the homeopathic remedies where we try to prescribe one at a time, this sometimes these actually work better in combination to cover your whole picture. So,
Yeah, it's beautiful how they can have that synergistic effect like that and really provide like full, like a rounded, like a nicely rounded support system for different parts of the body.
Yes, in the book that me and you have been working with, Homeopathic Cell Salt Remedies, Healing with Nature's 12 Mineral Compounds, um, that one in the beginning has this amazing little intro that breaks down different ailments that you might use them for. And I found it really helpful for helping me think about, okay, this one and this one would be good because I kind of
Hmm.
had a hard time with combining them until I kind of had that support. And now it's like I know them a little bit better. So it kind of makes sense why I might pair that with this. You know, I'm having bone and skin issues. So I'm going to put those together kind of thing. So the book was really helpful. And because I was just learning by Googling things before then. And I needed something to ground my practice. So,
Yeah, yeah, that's it's a great book. It's by Lennon and Rolf. Rolf, I believe that's how you pronounce the last name. I'm not even going to attempt the first name.
well, I was
So
thinking about it, and I was like, maybe it's Nige Lennon.
Nige, that's what I was thinking too. Nige Lennon and Lionel Rolf. Um, so
Yeah, if we butcher
again,
that, then
apologies.
sorry, Nige.
Yes, sorry about that. Um, your book's wonderful though. Sorry, we just can't pronounce your name.
Right.
Uh, oh boy. All right. So moving on then, I guess, to number nine. So number nine is sodium chloride, more commonly known as salt. And in cell salt speak, we refer to it as nat mure. And this is a very well known remedy across homeopathic spheres and in with cell salts as well. It helps primarily with the balance of water distribution across the body. So it's great for managing conditions related to that. So if you think of it like a spectrum where on one end you have dehydration and on the other end you have swelling, um, this remedy or this cell salt would help find the balance between the two of those. It can also help support electrolyte regulation. That goes along with finding that balanced state with fluids in the system. So some common uses for this would be conditions like dehydration, swelling, or edema, or water retention, dry skin, or excessive thirst, or even digestive issues like diarrhea or constipation. So in people that are needing this, the water balance is off. And so you may notice that they suffer from excessive dryness of, let's say, like the skin, or they're excessively thirsty, or their lips are cracked, especially if there's a crack in the center of the lower lip. That's a keynote for this. Or even like with the bowels, they may, be chronically constipated as well. Um, this can be used for women towards the end of their pregnancy when you start to have a significant amount of swelling that occurs. That would be a great application for this. And interestingly, it's also excellent for acute cold sores around the lips and the mouth, or blisters on the tongue, or ulcers within the mouth. You can use it in the early stages of a dry cough. I was actually just working with my daughter's homeopath this morning because she's having some like allergy type symptoms. And she's like, well, let's try a dose of the Natmir to see, because her throat was like dry and scratchy, but she had a lot of sneezing and like watery, like clear discharge. And so we gave her a dose and she hasn't complained since of those symptoms. And then another interesting application of this would be for a person that may get back pain, but they're better laying on a hard surface like the floor. Now, this remedy is very well known for its application after suffering symptoms that come on after a significant loss. So it's one of the primary remedies to look towards when there may be somebody suffering from grief or ailments from grief, um, or loss of like a job or a dream, for example. So it doesn't necessarily have to be grief over a loved one, it could be grief over losing anything. And so this person tends to hold in their tears. And so all of that water then becomes imbalanced inside of the system. And this will 100% bring those tears back out of the system. And then if you think about ailments from emotional stress. So, like headaches or cold sores that may come out following emotional stress, or that have been caused by too much heat, particularly from the sun, or hormonal surges around the menstrual period. This would be a remedy you may possibly want to consider as well.
Awesome. Yep. And it is turning into hay fever season soon. So I would say might want to go ahead and purchase some if you are known to have that
Yeah.
sneezy, clear snot, runny nose. I'm already starting to see that come up quite a bit. So,
Yeah. Yes, all the trees are starting to bloom around me.
yes. All right. So, number 10 is nat phos, also known as sodium phosphate. It has an affinity for the stomach, the intestines, the head, the mucous membranes, and the nerves. So, I had a whole quote I was going to read with this, but I think I'm going to skip because we're starting to get pushed on time. But if you want to learn more about these remedies, you can read The 12 Tissue Remedies of Schussler by William Boricke. And he's going to go into, he has a whole materia medica and a repertory on these. So I found it very fascinating as I was doing this deep dive to really go all the way through them. And I learned so much by looking at them from that deeper perspective. But what you want to think about with this one is that it is a really great acid neutralizer, especially lactic acid. So a lot of people will refer to this as the biochemical antacid. So if you're reaching for Tums or you taking what was it Prilosec or Nexium or I don't know all the prescriptions these days, but if you are prone to have things like heartburn, you struggle with indigestion, you struggle with assimilating the nutrients from your food, this is something to consider. Because it is really good at helping maintain a balance between that acidity and that alkaline spectrum in the body. So a lot of disease kind of is triggered when it's too much one way or the other. So this will bring it back into balance. It can help reduce the acidity of the blood, and this is helpful in cases of gout, back pain, muscle aches, and indigestion. You might want to consider this remedy for those who are sensitive or have disordered digestive tracts. People who need this remedy cannot tolerate many foods, such as milk, fats, sweets, or vinegar, which cause acidity with heartburn, indigestion, and gas. They have acid belching after eating. This remedy is helpful for infants with colic who vomit curdled milk after eating and who are sensitive to cow's milk. As I was reading it, there was also a lot of rubrics for worms. So if your kid is starting to show signs that they may, have pinworms or the different types of parasites, you might want to consider this. It can come on as looking like constipation and then it switches over to sour smelling diarrhea. They may be kind of itching themselves. That's like the key sign for pinworms that you might want to look out for. And think of the color yellow when you're thinking of this remedy. So, someone needing this remedy, the back of their tongue, not the whole tongue, may be coated yellow and the discharges are yellow. The eyes weep a yellow, creamy mucus, which causes the lids to stick together in the morning. So, thick yellow mucus is one of the keys that would bring this remedy up. And I've also taken this remedy for headaches, and I had to do quite a deep dive to find the rubrics for it, but I did find one, and it's headaches on the crown of the head on awakening in the morning, severe pain in the head as if the skull were too full. So when I took this and it worked, my homeopath suggested it, and I think I had told her I feel like my head is going to explode. Like I had a lot of pressure. And I took this remedy, and 20 minutes later, I did not have a headache. So it is one to consider that you will not see it anywhere unless you're reading the Boriki book, because I couldn't find it anywhere else when I was Googling it. So, all right.
I love that you mentioned the lactic acid for that specifically because, I automatically think muscle cramps or pain, like from exercising. I would think mag phos, but those muscle cramps are more so from that lactic acid buildup. And
Right.
so in that application, this may be a better match than that mag
Right.
phos. And I haven't tried that, but I'm going to be trying that to see, if it makes how much of a difference that
Right.
makes.
And that's good to just kind of be mindful of if you're picking a remedy and it's not quite cutting it, maybe look a little bit more deeper into one of the other ones. So the longer you spend with these, the more you apply them in your real life experience, the more you're going to remember, oh yeah, that one was really great when I overdid it with exercise.
Yeah.
That's what I'm going to go for. So sometimes you just have to give yourself grace as you're kind of learning them. And once you have the experience of working with them, you do not forget. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's
It's like, getting to know them as friends, like we've talked about, a
mhm.
few times with the flowers and I think you may have even mentioned it on your podcast about homeopathy. You start to learn all these little nuances just like you do with your friends. The longer you're friends with them, the deeper that friendship goes, the more
Right,
you learn about like what specifically makes them tick or come
right,
alive, if you
right.
will.
She always gets sick in a draft.
Yes. Oh, that one, always sick in a draft. Uh, yeah. But it's true though. I mean, you know, everybody has their own little things, and
Right.
just like these cell salts and the remedies that we work with. So, okay. Next one, sodium sulfate or net sulf. So this is number 11. And this cell salt plays a key role in liver function, detoxification, and managing fluid retention. So it supports the elimination of waste products and helps with bile secretion from the liver. So it's commonly used for conditions related to liver health or detoxification, as well as bloating or gastrointestinal problems like indigestion or constipation. And the color discharge you're going to want to look for with this is green. So this is a really good remedy for headaches as well after an injury to the head. So this is one of those little nuances, right, where you're looking at, well, what caused the headache, or what was that, what events led up to that, so that etiology. And you would use this after arnica has been given and the swelling has reduced. Um, so people that need this are generally vulnerable to cold, wet, or damp weather, or to humidity. And then they tend to fall sick with a cough after that. Any mucus that would be coming out or coating the tongue would be green in color. And then it can also be used for little babies that are maybe experiencing colic or have green diarrhea after having starchy foods or fruits.
Awesome. All right. And last but not least is silica, also known as silica oxide. And this one is known as the homeopathic lancet. So it is remarkable as a cellular cleanser. So it's going to help open up those detox pathways and eliminate those toxins from the body. So it has an affinity for the bones, the glands, the hair, the mucous membranes, the nails, skin, teeth, and connective tissues. So it cleanses and supports pus formation and elimination. So you want to think about this for things like boils, because this can actually help bring it to the surface and allow it to finally clear out. It's It's good for slowly manifesting conditions and for conditions that are also slow to heal. So if it comes on slowly and it's kind of lingering, you might want to consider silica. It can help with poor nutrition assimilation and which leads to slow growth. It's really good for the skin, specifically if you notice that the skin is cracking. And it's also great for hair. You think about like brittle hair and nail problems. So when the nails are cracking and just overall weak, that's going to be a great flag that maybe silica is the nutrient that you need some support with. It's really good for cataracts because the lens of the eye contains a relatively high concentration of silica. So when we supplement with this remedy, it can actually be a good support for that. It can also help chronic constipation and diarrhea, suppress menstruation. And you want to be mindful if you have any surgical implants or you've just recently had stitches and you want those stitches to stay in place. You want to be mindful because this remedy is so good at pushing things out to the surface that it may actually push those stitches out, which we have seen firsthand in our class when a mother came in and was talking about her son had the stitches removed, but he still had a lot of pain in the area. So they gave silica and they actually had forgotten a stitch in his lip. And when he
Hmm.
took the silica, the stitch came out. So that's why this one is, it's just important to be mindful if you're not quite ready to push certain things out to the surface. Um, so people needing this remedy tend to be sensitive, chilly, and sweaty types who catch a cold easily. They may have become chilled in a cold wind or draft. Haha, it's funny. I already used that example, and I was like, "That's why. That's where that example came from earlier." Or they may become worn out after a period of overwork. Their hair and nails are generally weak, thin, and break easily. Um, Teething babies may be able to use this as a support when they take forever to produce teeth or get sick with diarrhea, cough, or a cold with every tooth. Silica is also useful for building the health and strength of bones after a fracture when it can be given in altern alternation with calc fluor and calc phos, which is what Ashley was referencing earlier. And Miranda casserole has an amazing cell salt that already has those pre-combined, and that can be really helpful if you're needing it more regularly, so you're not just like constantly pulling out 3 bottles all the time. Um, so if you do have those brittle nails or you are healing from a fracture, it may be worth just purchasing Miranda Casserole's nails. What was it? Hair nails.
Skin, no, skin was not in it. It was
You think I would write this down,
bones,
but
bones, nails, hair, and teeth, I
okay.
believe.
Yes, so you can purchase
Yes.
that on her website. So
Yeah.
yeah, we talked about it being the homeopathic lancet, um, because it hastens the separation of pus formation, the pus formation process. Give it after a splinter has become embedded, and it will help the foreign body to be evicted. It helps with infections and post-surgical scars that are inflamed, painful, and slow to heal. So I've absolutely used this with my daughter who had a splinter. It wasn't going to be easy to remove. And so she was really close to bedtime. I was like, honey, let's just take some silica and go to bed and see what happens. And when she woke up, she did not have a splinter. There was no tweezers or screaming or, you know,
No
all of the things,
post-traumatic stress
right?
for
So if you
everyone.
have a splinter, it is worth considering taking this in self-salt form. So
Yeah, silica's a great one to have on hand, especially if you have littles that are very active outdoors.
yes, yes. All right. So would you like to give an overview on what some people call the 13th cell salt bioplasma for us?
Yeah, so bioplasma is a combination of all 12 of the cell salts in one pill or one bottle, if you will. And You may hear arguments for and against bioplasma. Some people would argue not to use bioplasma because um, they say that there are some remedies that antidote or some cell salts that antidote the other ones, and so you wouldn't want to use them in combination with one another. But I personally am very team bioplasma um, because I've seen it work firsthand in my own family, but B, if you have a busy life or you're if you've got like a large family and things are just kind of hectic, you're constantly running, it's much easier to carry around and dose from the bottle of bioplasma as opposed to carrying around 5 or 6 bottles of cell salts to make the combination of what you're looking for. And so I think this is actually a really good, like, full circle moment back to our conversation at the beginning about some of the differences between cell salts and homeopathy. Um, in homeopathy, you wouldn't, you absolutely would not have that combination and use it that way. But in cell salts, it's okay to do that. And you still will get, great benefit from using the bioplasma. I have people that, take it when they're starting to feel like a cold coming on, or they're just feeling like a little run down or, weak because maybe they've had like a lot of stuff going on, or maybe they had a really hard workout, or maybe they just feel like they need that little extra boost of like get up and go. Like they'll, put a couple bioplasma in their water or take a couple of the little pilules and, it'll help them turn, right around. It's really good, like at the start of an illness or the end of the illness where you're kind of trying to come back online. And I think it's just a great everyday tool to have in your toolkit from even, just from an ease of use standpoint. So,
Yes, absolutely. I've recommended it to a few people that weren't even really aware of what cell salts were. They definitely didn't have all 12, but they were just complaining of every day they wake up, they're just absolutely exhausted. They are not making it through. It sounded a little bit like, adrenal fatigue. Um,
hmm
and, they're in a crunch financially. So I'm like, hey, why don't you just try the bioplasma? And I've had multiple people come back after I have just randomly commented and they went and purchased the bioplasma and they were like, this actually legit helped me get
hmm
over that hump of exhaustion. So it's, it's such a gift. And this is one that's easy to keep in your purse if you don't want to carry all 12, which I've been just
Who
doing it
does?
lately because I'm like, who knows, one of the family might come down with something. So I feel like at this point I see the benefit. So creating like just a small first aid kit of them, putting them in smaller bottles maybe would be a great way to kind of keep them with you. But the bioplasma is great if you don't have that ability to carry them all the time. Just go ahead and pop the bioplasma. When you get home, you can spend a little bit more time evaluating at that point, like which one might be the best one to hone in on. So it's absolutely been, a great um, thing in my life. So I
Yeah.
can validate that. So could we just briefly go over how cell salts are typically taken and the difference between taking them acutely versus chronic prescribing?
Yeah, so I guess kind of the theme, the cell salts are much more flexible than homeopathy, right? And so when you're taking them, there's a couple, different ways that you can take them. You can take them as a dry dose or a wet dose, much like you would with a homeopathic remedy. So you can take the actual pilules themselves, or you can throw them in water. I tend to prefer putting them in water because then I can just kind of sip on it throughout the day, and I'm only using, one or two of them as opposed to multiple every time throughout the day. And so I'm getting um, that constant like dose of them just from sipping the water. And then when you're taking them acutely versus chronically, you would kind of look at, okay, why am I taking them? Am I taking them for something like a cold, or am I taking them for something maybe that's more of like a deficiency or like to supplement something? And so if you're taking them more so for a cold, you would be prescribing them acutely and you'd likely be taking them more frequently, but for a shorter amount of time. So let's say, for example, you would take um, every, couple hours throughout the day, but you would only take them for like 2 to 3 days if you were doing something acutely with them. Whereas if you were treating more of a chronic type situation or more of a supplemental type situation, you you would take them over a period of several days, and then you would stop for a couple days and then you would start again for a period of several days. So people will recommend situations where you would say take them during the week and then stop on the weekends and then start it up again during the week. And so that may be for things like 2,3 mineralization, or if you have a broken bone like that you're working on healing, some of those more like longer term types of ailments that you're trying to work through. And you want to make sure that you have that pause in there so you allow your body time to assimilate the minerals into your system and for your body to actually be able to use them, bring them into the cells, and then build up the level that's in your body. So a little bit different between the two, but there's still quite a bit of flexibility. So you may take them for 4 days on, 3 days off. You may take them, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. There's a lot of variation in how you can take them, and there's a lot of grace that you can give yourself if you miss a dose, or maybe you take an extra pill during one dose. You don't necessarily have to really worry about that, because there's a lot of flexibility and a lot of grace with how you can take them, which I think is also what makes them so good for a starting point for
Right.
people, because you can't really mess them up when you're
Right.
taking them.
Right. Yeah, I definitely like that with these. You can really listen to kind of your intuition, really get to know your body and say, okay, I took it an hour ago, but I'm starting to dip again. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to go ahead and take another dose instead of thinking like with a Tylenol, like you take it every 6 hours, you have to wait, that's not something that is as stressed here. So I'm gonna quote Miranda Castro. So this is from her Gentle Little Souls article, which can be found for free on her website, all about cell salts. But this is her suggestion, taking them acutely, which I think is kind of a cool rule of thumb, but then also let your body tell you. So she says for severe acutes, you can take every half an hour to an hour. So this would be like a very high fever. You're in pretty excruciating pain. For moderate symptoms, you could take every 2 to 3 hours. So this would be the pain is bearable. You have a pretty rough cough, but it's not super extreme. And for mild cases, every 4 to 6 hours. So if you're able to carry on working, you're just kind of going about your day, you're just feeling a little run down, you don't have to take them as often. So that's just a general rule of thumb, which I found helpful in the beginning. But once you start to work with them, you won't even need to be looking at the clock because your body will tell you when it needs another dose. So if it's working and you're feeling relief, but then you have that relapse, that don't worry about it. That's just your body letting you know exactly what it needs. And at that moment, it needs a little more support. So I love with homeopathy because we look at the symptoms as the way our body's communicating with us instead of just being like panicking and just like, shut it off, shut it off. It's like, okay, well, you're just telling me we need a little bit more, mag phos. So I'm going to give that to you. I'm going to listen. And it just changes the way that you view your symptoms and these illnesses, that are just a part of life. So, um, all right, let me I'm like moved my piece of paper. Um, all right, so as we wrap up, I will attach in the notes all the books that we've referenced over the course of this episode. Um, so let's take the last few minutes to just share a little bit about our YouTube channel and our upcoming homeopathy class in June.
Yeah, so we've kind of been talking for a little while about, wanting to get the message out there of these beautiful tools that we have, right in front of us to be able to really take charge of our own health and to take that power back into our own body. And we've, I guess, kind of through that process have, birthed, if you will, this idea of the YouTube channel of Is That Homeopathy, where we'll be sharing content like this. We'll be talking about, foundational information for homeopathy. We'll be talking about, the different remedies. We'll be talking about myths and debunking myths and sharing the information that we've learned into smaller, more easily digestible um, bites, if you will, to help people learn about the philosophy and the science of homeopathy and things that are related or even on the fringe of homeopathy, if you will, so like cell salts or supportive tools that help us work as homeopaths and work with the remedies. So I'm super excited about that and about bringing that up online, for sure.
Yeah.
So
And the class that we're teaching is going to be a hybrid class. So, if you're local to Knoxville, you can join us at the Sacred Owl and Salt Room from 11 to 5 Eastern Time. But if you're not local to Knoxville, then you can email one of us, which I'll attach our emails into the description, and join us through Zoom for that class, which will be on June 28th. So
yes,
I'm really looking
I'm
forward to that.
looking. I am 100% looking forward to that. The first class was so fun, and I just can't wait to have our next class together. It's going to be fantastic.
Yes, absolutely. All right. Well, we're getting close to time, so I'll go ahead and wrap up with you. But thank you so much for coming back on the show. It's always a pleasure to spend some time with you. So,
Yeah, love chatting with you. It's so much fun, and I feel like we just, always have great conversation together. So,
yes, absolutely. And thank you all for tuning in. Check us out next time on the Astral Hour.